Hey everyone, and happy Tuesday. Reverend Sarah Grady from St. Paul's United Church in Paris, Ontario. And it's a Tuesday, but I'm just doing a reminder for tomorrow. Wednesday, September the 30th, is Every Child Matters Orange Shirt Day. This is in recognition of the ongoing work that we're continuing to do around Indigenous justice for our brothers and sisters who are native to this land, who are struggling still with the effects of our Indian residential schools, who are still trying to figure out how to move forward with cases for missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. And so we do a recognition each year on the 30th of September. So wear your orange shirts tomorrow. It's a great opportunity for you to have a conversation around the table, dinner table tonight with the kids, perhaps about why we might want to wear an orange shirt, around what happens with the recognition with this, and around the truth and reconciliation process. There's lots of information out there for you, so I won't go into too much detail here, but just a reminder to go ahead and do that and lift up that good work and that social justice piece that we are called to in the United Church of Canada and beyond. So this week, our passages in We Make the Road by Walking, the chapter that we're looking at is chapter 5 on Sunday this past week, and the chapter is called In Over Our Heads, and that's a reference to the Noah and the Ark story. But we actually looked at 3 stories in the Old Testament, and the first one was Cain and Abel, the second one was Noah's Ark, and the third was the tower story, particularly the Tower of Babel and the collapse of the tower. And my goodness, this was another heavy chapter. We're looking for the light side of things. We're starting off a little bit light in this book, and now we're into the heavy, and I promise it will get lighter again. But to look at the lighter side of what this chapter is trying to say this week, I liked what Brian McLaren had to say around storytelling. Storytelling is such an ingrained part of our culture. It's been around since the earliest of times, since the dawn of time, actually. And obviously, before there were pens and pencils and computers and cell phones to text one another information, people had to write things down differently. They had to pass things along orally, and so oral tradition was the beginning. Storytelling is the first act that people had to share the stories of our beginnings, and so things were passed along and they were changed from generation to generation, and stories evolved and they were enhanced. Some things were forgotten and other things added, and so who really knows what the actual factual beginning of a story is? We just know it as we know it later on in life. And something interesting that I did this past Sunday, we had a really fun opportunity to gather over at Five Oaks with Richwood United Church and share a joint service there outside. And I asked people to help me to tell the story of Noah's Ark and asked them what elements they remembered. And some people remembered some things and other people remembered other things. And it took us a moment to get going. And, I'd said, shout out, what's the first thing that happened? And what's the last thing that happened? And people started remembering, oh yeah, that part of the story. So some forgot something and others helped them pick it up. And that's the way it can be with storytelling. It might not all be exactly as it happened, but there is truth at the heart of it. And Brian McLaren says a particularly disturbing truth that lies at the heart of these stories this week for us. And in particular, what he says about the flood story is, although many people think of this as a cute story about animals and a boat ride, which is, from my own childhood experience of Sunday school, how we're always taught the Noah's Ark story, those who think more deeply find it more deeply disturbing, because the image of violent oppressors and innocent victims drowning together seems only to make a bad situation worse. At the heart of this story is God's desire for a better world. God has created a world that has become wrapped up in sin and empire and thinks, I can't do this anymore. I can't have this world and I need to start over. And so God sends this flood and begins again. And yet, after this flood, we know that nothing really changes. People still are as they are. And so it's always going to be that we're always going to have to work really hard to become that better people that God calls us to be. So there is an interesting theme running through this chapter. There's an interesting way for us to look at our flood story, at the Cain and Abel story, and at the tower story. The end of the chapter, Brian McLaren says, to be alive is to join God in caring for the oppressed, the needy, the powerless, the victims, and the vulnerable. To be alive is to believe that injustice is not sustainable and to share God's desire for a better world. So although these are difficult stories for us to unpack, they are trying to tell us a truth, which is that God desires a better world for all of us. To be alive is to look at our world and say, God is better than that, and know that our world can be better, and so can we. I actually take heart in that because I think that's actually what happens or what is happening in our world right now. During this pandemic, I must admit there's been certainly some things that have disturbed me about people's behavior, but for the most part, I've actually seen more positivity than negativity. I've seen people more interested in helping one another and becoming caring and becoming part of a collective of good and moving into a different place. Now, it's taken us thousands and thousands of years to get to this place, but I actually see some hope and some justice being lived out in this time. And so I turn to the questions for this week and leave them with you to think about. Name a thought or idea from the lesson this week that especially intrigued, disturbed, challenged, encouraged, warmed, warned, helped, or surprised you. There's a whole list of adjectives for you to choose from, and I'll let you think about that for a minute. This one's also interesting. How do you respond to the comparison between stories and scientific theories, or the distinction between factual and actual truth? And I love this one actually. In the service on Sunday, I talked to people about the game Broken Telephone. Have you ever played that game? It's so fun and it can have hilarious results. You start with a phrase or a sentence and you say it to whisper it in somebody's ear, and they pass that along to the person next to you and it goes down the line. And sometimes at the very end, the original phrase is repeated, but actually more often than not, somebody wants to be silly and change a word or the entire sentence, or somebody mishears is usually more often than not the case. And so, the word God might become dog, or the word love might become glove. And so you could say God is love and it could become dog is a glove by the end of it. And who knows how that happens. Somewhere along the way, people misunderstood. It's an important thing to remember with the factual versus actual part of stories that we read in the news or even in our history books, or particularly the Bible, because the Bible was translated from oral tradition. It started off with storytelling and over the years was told in different languages, and it was written down later and translated over and over and over again. And so the factual versus actual truth of what's happening in a biblical story and a narrative that we read is a very interesting thing to think about. But I love the idea that at the heart of every story, there is truth at the heart of every story, and we need to seek that out in these stories. And a question for the children, which is really good when we think about our Orange Shirt Day, and at the heart of what was going on with the Indian residential schools, people thought they were doing good in the world with the proselytization of our Native brothers and sisters. However, at the heart of it was kind of bullying. And so the question for the children this week is, have you ever known a bully? Have you ever been a bully? Or have you ever been bullied? And that's particularly, there's another shirt day that we recognize in our North American culture, which is Pink Shirt Day, and that's an anti-bullying day to think about. So there's lots of stuff to think about this week. It's a little heavier, but I promise you that we're going to go into the lighter very soon and maybe think of some more lighthearted things. But I invite you into this space of thinking a little more deeply about our ancient narratives and how they play out and how they are continuing to inform what's happening for us today in the year 2020. So I'll leave it there. I won't offer you too much more. I'm going to invite you into the actual space here at St. Paul's this coming Sunday. We are at this time still looking at reopening for worship, our first in-person worship service. We have made all the necessary arrangements for social distancing and for safety precautions. We've had the fire marshal in, we've had Brant County Health do an inspection, and so we are ready for you to invite you back into our space. And if you're still not ready, that's okay. We're still going to have some online content for you. Our service will be taped and later uploaded to our YouTube channel. And so, my friends, wherever you are this day, may God be with you. May you know that you are being held in prayer by us here at St. Paul's, and continue to check in with me and let me know what you might need for questions, concerns, or prayers this week. May God be with you till we see each other again. Take care, friends.